Enrollment Liaison for NAFSA Region 7, and previously served on the Board of Tennessee TESOL.
Bienvenido, Magister Todd Beard.
Let's welcome Magister Todd Beard.
Well, hello, good evening, Colombia. I'm Todd Beard, as they've introduced me here. I'm broadcasting from Nashville, Tennessee, so very excited to be with you tonight. I'm going to share my screen with you, and hopefully this will work, and we can go through this presentation tonight. Hopefully you can see my screen now, and if you can't, just send me a message through the chat, and we'll try to change that and fix that, everything. Oops, here we go. All right, so again, my name's Todd Beard. I work at Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. I work with international students there at the university and direct our intensive English program, as well as work with student support, success, and retention with the College of Pharmacy and other places on campus. If you've never been to Tennessee, then when the pandemic is over, I invite you to come. I would love to have you as a guest here in our great state. It's a beautiful state, especially this time of year. The leaves start to change colors and fall, and it is really, really beautiful. So love to have you come visit. This is going to be an interactive presentation tonight, so I want to have you involved in this whole process. So I put a link in the chat a few minutes ago, and if you want to participate in this, I would love to have you. You can go to menti.com, either on another tab or a different device, and you use that code, and you push that code in, and then you can participate in the presentation as we go, okay? So hopefully we'll try this. I've done this many times remotely and in other places, so hopefully this will work. If it doesn't, that's okay. That's not the core of the presentation tonight. But we are gonna start off with a question, and I wanna get some feedback from you just straight away. What do you think innovation means? So I'm just gonna wait for your responses to come in. And again, hopefully this will work, and hopefully some of you will jump in on this presentation, and I'll just watch for your answers to magically appear any second now. So you do need to respond in English, obviously. I would try to speak in Spanish, but it would be very disappointing to most of you, I promise you. I promise. So if you can access menti.com and put the code in there, that would be fantastic. Pull up a different device or a different tab, and we can see some feedback there. We're going to talk about innovation and pedagogy tonight. We're not going to go into a great amount of detail on every single piece of pedagogy, but I do want to get some information from you. So it looks like I've given myself the teacher 7 second. There we go. We got one answer. I was going to say give myself the 7-second rule in teaching. I usually give my students 7 seconds of silence, and if I don't get a response, then I move on. So we've got be creative. Absolutely, being creative is part of innovation. Absolutely. So I'm a little bit of a nerd. I like to read. I like to read research. I like to look at data. I like to look at information. And this is one of my favorite quotes. I have it on the wall in my office, and it says, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." I want to encourage you tonight as teachers, as future teachers, as educational leaders, to really start thinking about yourself as someone who can ground themselves in using data and using research to form how you practice in the classroom, how you work with students. And you may have heard the phrase, necessity is the mother of invention. And I wanted to share with you tonight a phrase that I thought of. I don't know, maybe somebody else has said it, but if necessity is the mother of invention, then I think research should really be the mother of innovation. Because creativity is an important part, as was mentioned by somebody who chimed in. Creativity is a really important part of innovation. But really, if we look at the backbone and the foundation of innovation, we should really start looking at research, because research informs our practice. And as you've already heard through a lot of the presentations tonight, we're talking about research and the importance of it, and the value of it. And you as educators, you as teachers, will be involved in that process and have already been involved in the process of research. And you can see how it changes and informs education. So our objectives tonight are really talk about innovation, to talk about what I call the 3 M's, metacognition, memory, and motivation. And then I want to just have a moment with you to encourage you as teachers and educational leaders to be the change agents in your environment. So when you start to teach in a classroom, when you start to work in an educational environment, and you're already in an educational environment right now as students, but I want you to think about how you can start to create and make changes in your environment. So there's a few definitions that we're going to talk about tonight. You may hear me refer to those, and I just wanted to have those available to you on the screen, L1 and L2. Those are obviously familiar to you if you've done any reading and research in second language acquisition. As we talk about innovation, I want to talk about some things that were not very innovative. I think it's important to differentiate between what is an idea and what is something that's truly innovative and causes a positive change. And I wanted to contextualize this if you look at the United States and some things that have happened in the past 20 and 30 years in educational context, particularly if you look at these English-only movements. Now this one in particular happened in California in the late 1990s. It's called Proposition 227. And Proposition 227 basically said that any student who is studying in the state of California can only learn through English. So there would be no home language or L1 support at all for any of those students. They would only speak in English, which on the surface sounds like a really good idea, because you think students should only learn in English, they should be immersed in that environment. But the reality is what happened to these students is they would get into a situation and not really be growing in the target language. And additionally, what would happen is subtractive bilingualism would start to occur. And subtractive bilingualism, if you don't know what that is, effectively what happens is those students will lose their L1 over time, and the L2 will grow. Now, what could happen then is even students become semi-lingual. They become partially proficient in the target language and partially proficient in their L1. And then we have these students who are semi-linguals and really are not true bilingual students. And then the ultimate disappointment really was the demotivated student. So that's just an example of something that didn't work in the United States. And I'm just going to caution you with the next slide. Don't panic, but I would love to get your feedback and your input on this as we look at what's happened in Colombia in the past 20, 30 plus years in regards to bilingual education. Now, I will be the first one to tell you, wow, it is amazing what is happening in Colombia in regards to bilingual education and what is being promoted from the highest levels to support and promote bilingualism for students in public schools. The downside of that, what sounds like a really innovative idea, the downside of that is in reality, maybe these programs have not been resourced well enough. And this is just one piece of data that I pulled to show that the target was 40% of students in public schools would be at least at an A2, maybe B1 level. However, it was well below that target. So it's exciting to think about innovation, yet it's sometimes disappointing when that innovation is not supported appropriately and particularly isn't supported by research. So a couple things that Colombia is really leading on is, and you know this because you are doing it, you're participating in it and learning about it, is content language integrated learning. I really first learned about it through coming to Colombia and hearing about the things that are happening in the bilingual environment there in Colombia. It's also happening in a lot of bilingual and native English or first language programs in a lot of different private schools as well. I used to work in London, England, and I worked for an international school. And that international school promoted home language learning. So every single student, if their first language was not English, they received language support in their first language consistently throughout the week, every day they would have lessons both in English and in their home language. And that's research-based. We know that that works. We also know that CLIL works. Those are the things that work. And so as you think about what you're going to do in your classroom, now innovation can just be creativity. It can also be some of these bigger ideas that we talked about. But as you think about your classroom and the future of your teaching, and you as an educational leader, I want you to think about what is research-based. What does that mean to be research-based? And then I want you to think about how feasible is it for you to do that in your classroom, in your class environment. Because some things are great ideas on paper, and the research backs it up, but maybe you don't have the right set of circumstances, the right environment to make that particular type of research-based pedagogical strategy feasible in your classroom. You also need to think about the implications for your students and for the target language. So what works well for one student may not work well for another student. And so you have to be creative and think about how being innovative works in your classroom, but also base that on research, base that on how feasible it is, and look at the implications of it. I want to talk about these 3 M's tonight, and I've done a lot of reading and a lot of studying and research on these 3 M's, and the first one is metacognition. Probably heard of what metacognition is. It's thinking about your thinking. So what are you thinking about? What are you learning? What are you knowing? What are you understanding? It's really just having a moment to reflect. Now you might think as a student, as a teacher, why is it so important to think about our learning? Well, as you can see there, it helps you to do things that are reflective, and it makes that practice tangible for you. It also does something really, really powerful. It improves your learning skills, your retention skills. And those retention skills just help you hold the information long-term in your memory, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But that process helps you be a problem solver. And what we want our students to be, and what you want to be as a learner, is a problem solver. And you as a teacher need to be modeling that for your students. I try to model that for my students and ask those questions, ask those reflective questions of what it means to reflect on your learning. And some of those questions could be like the ones that you see right there. These could just be some sample reflective questions for you. You could think of 100 different more questions. But if you look at the frequency of these questions, that is most important. Because as you as a teacher are modeling this reflective exercise, this metacognition, you're doing this before you engage in lessons, you're doing it during the lesson, which is often the time that we forget to reflect, and you're doing it after every lesson. So thinking about what do you want to learn about a particular topic, science, math, the environment, whatever your topic might be, ask your students these questions. That engages them in the metacognitive process of reflection and will help them long-term be better learners. They will learn language better, and they will also retain information better about the topic. It's really, really important for you as a teacher to practice this as well, even in your own learning, as you're finishing your degree programs, as you're finishing your either your bachelor's or your master's degrees, or even just as an educator. I do this a lot. I will reflect tomorrow and probably for the next few months about this very conversation that we're having, this very presentation, and think to myself, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? How could I improve my skills as a researcher, as a learner? So those are things that you can model to your students. And in the case of modeling, I want to ask you a question. What do you want to know about metacognition? So I'm going to let you, just for a second, I'll give you my teacher 7-second rule, and I will let you give some feedback there. And again, if we don't have a lot of people feeding back, that's okay, but I would love to get some people chiming in and asking some questions. What do you want to know about metacognition? What do you want to know? Or if you want to ask a different question, It's totally fine with me. I'm completely comfortable. And even as a teacher, that's what we have to do. We have to be adaptive and comfortable with new situations that are always changing and allowing your students to be reflective. So a great question that we got come in, how to develop metacognitive strategies with your students. So I think the important thing here is to have some questions on hand and ready. And I think even around your classroom, if you've got some questions, some why questions, some how questions, and you can have how ... as part of your questions, and the students will start to begin to see how that happens. Again, the frequency is important. Before you start a lesson, ask your students, what do we want to learn about this? You might ask a student, what are some of your goals in learning English? Or what are some of your goals in this science project that we're doing? Okay? So metacognition, a really, really important part of the learning process. Now, we're going to switch now into memory. Okay, this is the second M of our 3 M's tonight. We're going to talk about memory for a second. And I love learning about the brain, how the brain works. There's a new book that has just come out about how the brain learns and how we're trying to teach robots to learn like our brains learn. It's really fascinating. So one of the things that happens in educational contexts is that you see that we structure our entire school, our entire day at school around studying for long chunks of time. You've probably been in classes in the evenings or in the daytime that last for an hour, maybe 2 hours, for long periods of time. I think what we have to ask ourselves is that the most effective way to learn, and what can we do to change it? So we can't change our school day, and we might not be able to change how we're going to learn and function in our night class that lasts for 2 hours. But we can definitely learn about how we can change what happens within those 2 hours as teachers and educational leaders. What we know from research is that shifting the brain's attention, when we change topics more frequently, that we actually are able to learn more. We restore our learning efficiency. Have you ever had one of those moments where you get distracted in a class? You might be distracted right now. You might be drinking some Juan Valdez coffee in Colombia and be distracted right now with something else that's happening. Well, that's a normal distraction. That's perfectly normal. But what we want to do in a classroom environment is have some systems in place where we can have a frequent moment of shifting our attention from topics. So for example, we might have in a 3rd grade class, you might say, we're going to study math for an hour. Well, I would suggest, based on some of this research here, and based on what we know about how the brain learns and attention, I would suggest that we study math for 20 minutes, and then we study science for 20 minutes, and then we come back to math for another 20 minutes. That actually keeps our students much more engaged, and as we know from the research, it keeps our learning efficiency at a top level. I'm going to show you just something here about how memory actually fails us, and this is really disappointing for me because in a few days, you'll be reflecting on this conference and you'll think, what did we talk about? What were the things that we discussed in that conference? And honestly, what might happen, there's a risk here that you will not remember very much of what we talk about tonight or what we've talked about in this conference for the past 3 hours. So that's a pretty frightening thing to me as a presenter. And for you as a teacher, you need to remember that when you are presenting new information to your students, that it has the potential to be lost very quickly. Now, there's good news. The good news is that if we revise or if we revisit that topic frequently, then our students will retain that information. So for example, tonight, if we revisited some of the topics, if in your classes at USEVA in the coming weeks, you revisit some of the topics that have been discussed tonight, your long-term retention of the information shared will be held in your long-term memory. And that's an exciting thing for me because it gives me some relief. But for you as a teacher, you need to think about what that means is how you structure your classes, how you structure your day around teaching. This strategy is called spaced repetition or distributed practice. There's two different words for it, but it is a research-based in multiple areas about how it increases the retention of information in students. It is a high utility technique, okay? It is very, very functional. It's very easy to use with your students because all you need to do is switch up the topics, okay? Sometimes you switch up topics or sometimes you just switch up activities, okay? You might do this automatically already and know to do this, but the practice is we might stay on the topic of science, but we might do different activities for those different pieces of time there. And one of the things that's really important is when you talk about new information with students, that you're reviewing it and assessing it and reviewing it and assessing it. And that cycle just continues over and over again. I know in higher education, there's definitely an understanding around tests that it's always high stakes tests. We over-test in the United States. We over-test students from kindergarten all the way through graduate programs. We just test too much. But I think if we change how we test, we can remove the stigma of testing as a positive thing. And I put a little data point in the corner there to show that practice testing, not high stakes testing, is a very, very effective way to work with students. So if you're thinking about your language learners, you're thinking about your students in class, how do you get them to retain? Well, let's test them frequently, but let's have very low stakes testing going on. I'm working with some students now at Lipscomb University, and this is one of the things that I practice. I do what are called pop quizzes. So I say, oh, surprise, we're gonna have a quiz today. But then I say, but don't worry, it's not for a grade. Like, we're just gonna have fun and learn this. So we do an activity that's really engaging. We do some electronic board of flashcards and some things that are fun and engaging. And I test the students and see how they do. And then the next day, I'll do a pop quiz that does have a grade attached to it, but it's much lower stakes and we've reviewed it. And then the following week, we'll come back and review it. So you as a practitioner in the classroom have an opportunity to participate in this research-based spaced repetition. Really exciting research coming out there. Okay, part two of the memory here. I do need you to feedback on this. So I'm gonna get you, everybody who's listening, I want you to participate in this. If you go to menti.com and a new tab or open up your phone, I know there's a lot going on tonight and it's 9 o'clock at night already on a Friday, but I would love to have you participate in this. This is a fun little test for you to see how much you know about how it works with our memory. Okay, so here's what happened. Researchers split students into 4 different groups. The students were tasked with learning the same material, but they were given different instructions about how to learn that material, okay? And then they were given a test, okay? So the first group would read the material one time, and then they were given a test, okay? The second group was told, read this material 4 times, and then we'll give you a test. The third group would read the material, and then they were told to make a mind map or a graphic organizer, you know, where you draw a picture of what you just read about. So to make some kind of graphic visual that helps you understand it. And the fourth group was tasked to read the material one time and then recall as much as possible. Now, recall just means talk about it. It just means share what you say, okay, or share what you just read about. So read the material one time, and then talk about it as much as you can for as long as you can. So those are the 4 groups. You read the material once, you read it 4 times, or you read it once and make a mind map, or you read it once and you recall as much as possible. So go to menti.com right now, punch the code in, and this should be on your screen and you should be able to vote. I'm just gonna wait a few seconds and hopefully everything will come in. We've got at least one person who's voted. Okay, we've got a few people voting. Group 3, reading and making a mind map, looks to be the most popular one so far. Everybody's going to 3. Okay, 6 people, all right. Don't do what everybody else does. You can make your own choice. All right, which one's the most effective for learning? We've got 7 votes on reading and making a mind map or doing a picture. We've got one who says, if you read it once, and group 4, if you read and recall, we've got 1 vote for it. Well, okay, we've got a couple more votes coming in. Group 3 is the most popular so far. Let's see if that's going to be the winner. I should have attached some sort of prize to this, like if I come back to Colombia, I buy you a cup of coffee or something. I don't know, or I bring you something from Tennessee. All right, so we've got 13 votes now for the most effective is reading and the mind map. All right, that looks like it's a pretty strong one. All right, very good. I'm gonna, we've got a couple more votes coming in. Good, thank you very much for participating. I know it's late at night, it's 9 o'clock, and I'm probably going overtime, so my apologies. All right, we've got a couple more. All right, so here it is, drum roll, here we go. This is actually the most effective, is the 4th group. If you read the material one time, and then you get your students to just talk about what they read, they will remember more than any other strategy. It's fascinating. Did you know that? Can you believe that? So reading material one time and then recalling as much as possible. If you do this and get your students practicing this, they will get very comfortable with it and be much better readers. They'll be much better readers because they will read carefully, and then they will begin to retain much, much more. You've probably heard it said that if you teach about something, then you know about it. Well, that's effectively what this strategy is doing. It is getting your students to teach something that they've learned. It's called active recall, or the retrieval process. It's the most effective study strategy for students. It's the most effective strategy when you're working with students as a strategy to get them to retain information, yet it's rarely used in classrooms. It is very rarely used. It's surprising. Yet this is part of my point, is that if we go back to research and we really look and dig deep about how the brain works, how memory works, we can really make a difference in the lives of students. We can really make a difference. And that's an exciting thing for me as a teacher, as an educational leader, and for you as future teachers as you go through this learning process. If you don't believe me, look at the data. The green is called the retrieval practice. It has the highest rates. So for those of you who did answer in the 3rd group, you did pretty good, because it's the second best. Drawing a mind map is the second most effective. So it is effective. I don't want to take away from that, but the recall method is more effective. Okay, the last part here, and I'll be wrapping it up here in a few minutes, happy to take your questions in a few seconds, is motivation. Okay, a lot of things all come back to how motivated are our students. And personality weighs into that, if they're introverts or extroverts, whether or not they're making progress in the target language. You know, they look at their friend, and their friend is really improving and learning and growing, and they feel that anxiety. So that can either demotivate or motivate a student, depending on their personality and how they respond to it. You can also, quite frankly, have just some ineffective teachers or ineffective materials, or some ineffective strategies that aren't based in research that you can use in your classroom that will demotivate students. Now, the intention to continue to study is another motivational factor, because some students don't see the value in becoming bilingual. And this is something that is really important for us as educators to remove, that even if they don't have a plan to live in Australia or move to the United Kingdom or come to study in the US, we need to be promoting and showing value related to continuing study and becoming bilingual. And that comes in the engagement piece I'll talk about in just a second, is we as teachers need to engage the students cognitively with the behavioral situation. If they've got students who are distracting them in class, put them in a different location, and that emotional engagement. Having empathy with our students, especially now with the pandemic. Let's just take a moment to breathe and understand that it's challenging right now, okay? So having all those pieces in place are motivational factors for students. Probably heard of the self-determination theory. If you haven't, it's a really important part of understanding language learners and understanding just how students and psychology works hand in hand with the research here. The research shows that autonomy, competency, and relatedness are 3 key ingredients to making sure that students are determined to learn independently and to be on their own and show competency and connectedness. So making sure that your students are learning to be independent, you have to model this, okay? You have to model how to be an independent learner in the classroom. And we'll talk about some of the pedagogical implications in a second. And your students are improving their language skills, their knowledge and fluency. You need to be modeling that as well as making sure that they're connected to the learning community and making sure there's engagement there with the learning community. Now, the learning community could be your classroom. It could be the whole school. It could be your community, your wider community in the village or the city that you're living in. It just depends on your context, but it's really important for those students to feel connected. I was talking with a principal recently, and this principal said, I've really enjoyed getting to know some of this particular student. And I thought, a principal of a school is getting to know students in every single classroom in the school. Now, that makes a big impression on me as an educational leader, but just think of the value of that to the student, because the student now knows the principal, the head of the school, has made an effort to be part of my educational journey and show value there. So think of all that pressure. At least when I grew up, it was pressure about, oh, I don't want to get in trouble. But imagine that being lowered and helping students understand that we are learning together, and this is a learning community. We're here to learn and grow together. It's a really exciting thing to see. I want to ask you a question, though, and I want you to, again, chime in if you're back on your drinking your coffee or stepped away from your device. I want you to go back to this. What motivates you to be an educator? That's important for me to know, but this is also a reflective question. Back to our metacognition a few minutes ago. I want you to think, and feel free to type in here while we're waiting. You can just go back to menti.com and put the code in. Feel free to tell me, great, fantastic, we've got a couple already. Rewarding, it is absolutely rewarding to be an educator. Transformation, fantastic word. Making a change is really important. We're going to talk about this right at the end. This is fantastic. We get some great motivations. You want people to learn? Yes, I love to learn, and I love seeing people who want to learn. That's why I'm a little bit of a nerd, because I love to learn new things. I'm always just grabbing hold of a podcast or a new book or reading something. It's really exciting. Collaboration, fantastic. Your grandmother, fantastic, motivates you to be an educator. Collaboration, teachers motivate you. That's fantastic. Society, that's great. We want to be those change agents. Fantastic. Change and transformation, learning from students, fantastic feedback already. I love these word clouds. And just think about this. What if you do this with your students? What if you ask your students, what motivates you to learn? What motivates you to come to school every day? Now, at first, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to get some strange answers because kids are kids. But it's really fun to get your students thinking about these things, thinking about what motivates them. That does 2 things. It gets them thinking and reflecting on their own, but it also informs you as the teacher. So now you know what these students need. You know what motivates them. Just like I already know that 13 of you, these are the things that motivate you. Kids motivate you. Making a change motivates you. Absolutely. These are fantastic things. And this is what it is to be have the heart of a teacher. So that's fantastic. Great. All right, so our pedagogical implications here on the motivation piece, thinking about how you can have conversations with your students about what motivates them. Ask them, after you teach, what intrinsic and extrinsic motivation is. You might want to unpack that. Maybe that's with your middle or high school students. Talk to them about motivation and what do they enjoy most about language learning. The next one, look at who is your language hero? I want you to think about that for yourself for a moment. Think about what is a language hero. And I am scared to confess this to you, but I do kind of like Shakira's music. So Shakira's Colombian, and she's also bilingual. So think about how you could incorporate in your classroom, getting your students to think about who are some heroes. Maybe there's a football player that is famous in Colombia or Argentina or somewhere in Central or South America or somewhere in Europe who's bilingual. That can make those students really engage and see the value of becoming bilingual students and engage with their community. And just think of the impact that you can make on a child there. Asking them where they're most connected at the school, which class do they really enjoy, who are their best friends, and things like that. This helps lead our students to become more motivated and more reflective learners as well. Okay, so just a moment to wrap up here. As we finish, I want you to just reflect. I'm not going to put up a Menti so I can get your feedback. I just want you to think for a second about your most influential teacher. Who was the person who influenced you the most as a teacher? And if you've got that name in your mind, I want you to just ask yourself, what did they do that inspired you? And what did they do that challenged you? I don't know about you, but I'm thinking in my mind of different teachers right now. I can be in that school environment when I was younger and in that classroom, and I can see those teachers and I know what they did to inspire me. I had a college professor that he was a really engaging professor, and he would come in, it was a history class, which is normally a pretty boring class. He came in and he essentially played a character. He did character roles for the class. And he would come in as a historical figure. He didn't dress up, but he just played that figure. It really stuck with me. It really helped me learn so much about history because of the way he did that. So I want you to think about that as an educator, because what you are is a future educator. And being able to think about how you can use some of these research-based strategies in your classrooms. I want you to think about how to create those situations in your classroom and participate in them. Asking you a question here, what's the most powerful force in the education industry? It is not a policy. Policies are not the most powerful force in education. It is you. It is us. We're the teachers. We are the most powerful force in the education industry. We are the ones that can make the change in our communities and in our societies. You are going to have a lifelong impact on children. It is so exciting to do that. So as you thought just a few moments ago, you thought about who was an influence on my life as a teacher. Which teacher influenced me the most? One day, a student will be thinking about you. They will think about you as the person who influenced their life for the positive, for the better. Hopefully you will be that teacher who inspired them to change, who inspired them and motivated them to think reflectively, to ask difficult questions, and to retain information and be a global citizen. So I'm really excited about that opportunity for you. You can see my citations there in the presentation, and I've put my information. I might regret doing this, but you are welcome to reach out to me. I'd love to stay connected with you. I think I mentioned this a few minutes ago. I've been to UCEVA's campus. It's a beautiful campus. I wish that we could be in person right now. I was planning to be there in September of this year, and obviously that didn't work out, but I was glad to be able to be with you tonight. So feel free to get in touch if you want to keep in touch with me. I will make this presentation available again, so it's online, so you can scroll back through it and you can continue to give feedback on it as we go. So I would love to have more feedback as we go. I am pretty much done. I'm happy to take questions if anybody has questions. you can either put them in the chat or we can take questions on audio. I don't know what you recommend here.
Muchísimas gracias,
Thank
profesor.
you.
Muchísimas gracias al Magister Todd Beard por su interesante conferencia. Ahora vamos a abrir justamente un espacio para las preguntas del público y ya quedan bajo la moderación del profesor Larry Peñaranda.
Thanks to all attendees and especially to Magister Todd Beard for his interesting conference. Now it is time for questions from the public, which are in charge of Professor Larry Peñaranda.
Okay, guys. Hello, Todd.
Hi,
How you
nice to
doing?
meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Guys, if you need to know about it, I mean, you can type a question in the chat box. Okay. Maria Camila said, Professor Todd, has it? Hold on. Give me a second. Okay. Has it been difficult for you to make a change in your educational environment?
Has it been difficult to make a change in my educational environment? Well, yes, it is. It's challenging at first, and I want to make sure I understand the question well, so feel free to correct me. But as a teacher, it's challenging to get out of that mentality of how you learned. Okay, so if you grew up in an environment where the teacher was in control of the class and you didn't have a lot of freedom to participate and engage, I found it really challenging as a teacher to go in and do something that's different than the way that I learned. And so I think my first few times as a teacher were really tough. And I feel bad for some of those first few students. But as you grow as an educator, you'll see the value of learning from your mistakes and learning what students really need. And a lot of these students really they just need you to be there. They need you to be present and prepared and ready for them. I hope that answered your question. Let's see.
That's right.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Good stuff.
Okay. The next one is by Laura Milena. The question is, can innovation be achieved with children with learning barriers?
Yeah, so good question, even if it's too difficult for the teacher. Yeah, I actually meant to say that in the conversation because you're going to be in a classroom where you have a variety of, every student's different and every student has a strengths and weaknesses, and you're going to have classes with students who have special needs. You're going to have students in those classes who are just, quite frankly, just not as good at language maybe as some other students are. Some people just aren't, that's not their thing, or they're going to have low motivation, or they're going to have difficult home situations, and they're going to come in your class and it's going to be challenging, okay? And you're going to wonder for a moment, what am I doing? Is this really working as a teacher? And I think you have to have those honest moments with yourself, but you also have to encourage yourself and say, every moment with these children makes a difference in their lives. Innovation can be achieved with students with learning barriers, absolutely, because I believe with all my heart, every student can learn. Every student has the possibility to learn if they have the right teacher teaching them how to learn. And that's why, when I talked about those questions earlier, having questions for your students and modeling those is so important. Because when students get into the mindset of asking questions that might not have answers, it's not a 2 + 2 question, it's a why, it's a how, it's a I wonder question. And I think that's what really helps students.
Okay, with the same person, she asks, even if it's too difficult for the teacher in their learning the second language?
Yeah, so I mean, there are going to be students who are going to struggle with language learning, and especially if they have some learning barriers. depending on what those barriers are. If there are cognitive barriers, or if there are some environmental barriers, emotional barriers, whatever those might be. But again, if you look at progress with a student, I think you have to look at every step in the right direction for a student is learning. And I know sometimes as a teacher, we want to see, and that's a frustrating thing, I'll be honest with you, as a teacher, I want to see a lot of improvement in a really short amount of time. And that's just not how we are. You know, I use the example to myself sometimes. When I go out and I've got a yard and I cut the grass, I can see that I made a difference instantly because it's instant. But as a teacher, we have to look at the long term. And the long-term growth of a student is there, even though when we don't see it in that moment. So.
Okay, thank you. Camila posed the next question, actually two. What do you think about the alternative proposed in public education in Colombia? And the second one is, do you think they are correct?
Okay, great question.
That's right.
Great question.
It's time to answer, right?
I know. Well, I mean, based on what I know about the English Very Well proposition that I believe started in 2015 and expires in 2025. That's what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong. I love initiatives, and I love big visions for initiatives like that. But I think we have to be realistic with those initiatives, and that's a challenge for any high-level government, because our government does the same thing. We get these big ideas that are mandated on a national level, and then we as educators are left wondering, well, how can I do that? Like, it's not really feasible for me to do that. I don't have the resources. Our school doesn't have the money. We don't have enough teachers. We don't have qualified teachers. So I love that Colombia is doing those things. I don't know if they're not resourced, so if they're not given those resources, I don't think they're going to be effective. Now, I think they're good ideas. I think we just need to look at a better way to resource those things. So I think they're correct to have those ideas and push them and have them in the forefront, but they just need to be well resourced.
Okay, Todd. The next one is, Juan Camilo asks, what do you think about the way of teaching English in Colombia? I consider it's the same question I posed before, right? It's the same. No? What do
I
you
don't
think?
know. I mean, it depends on, you know, again, I've been to Colombia a few times, and what I've seen is good, but what I see in a lot of countries, and I'll just try to answer briefly, is, and again, I speak from a little bit of ignorance here, so you can correct me, but there's a lot of focus and emphasis on grammar, and my perspective is that's just not the most effective way to learn a language. We don't start with grammar. I am in the camp, I believe that language is acquired. So if you are teaching English in your environment, in your school, I propose that you only speak in English for certain times of the day where you just say, look, we're all going to speak in English right now. Just start your day like that, because that's when students will really be able to absorb the language, and they will be uncomfortable with that for a long time. I have a lot of students who get uncomfortable with me doing that, but I have to remind them that that's the best way to learn language. That's how I learned German. I lived in Germany for a couple of years, and I went to Germany. I didn't speak any German, and I walked away from Germany, and I had a pretty good command of the language. It's because people spoke German. So.
Okay, thank you. Dana Sofia Correa asks, all those tips regarding memory, do they also work in children? And how can be adapted for grades, just learning to read?
Yeah, so there were a couple memory tips, and I think one of them was, it's called spaced repetition. where you space out learning, and the other one was that we talked about was active recall. I think you're probably referring to active recall. A short answer is absolutely they work in children. Absolutely. Some of the research that we've seen has come out with high school and university students, but there has been research done on children as well. And if you just think of it as an example, in public schools in the US, what happens when you read a story? Like when you read a story in a second or third grade classroom, you don't just close the book and walk away. You ask questions about it. So in the same way that you're going to ask questions, what if instead of asking questions, which checks for comprehension, which is good and important, but what if we just said, all right, I want you to pair up with somebody and tell that person everything you remember from the story. And just get them talking about the story. My language classrooms were always really noisy. Like they weren't quiet places where students were working on paper. They were noisy because I wanted students to speak. When you're speaking, you're usually learning from a position of knowledge. So that's really important for me. I don't know if that answered your question, Camilla, but
Dana, the question posed by Dana.
Okay.
Okay, well, I see no more question, no comment, I
No
guess.
more questions or comments, all right.
Okay, my last, Maria del Carmen. What kind of strategies could be worked with students who suffer from nerves? Oh, when they talk. Oh, get stressed, you know?
Yeah, that's absolutely, it happens. So students will definitely get nervous about talking. So that's a really good question. One of the things that comes out of research is called lowering the affective filter. And this is another research-based theory-based that comes out of, I believe it's, I forgot the researcher's name now. Sorry, I got put on the spot. But lowering what's called the affective filter. So all these environmental components that drive students to feel frustrated or anxious, you as a teacher have to figure out with that student, what situation can I put them in where they will feel more comfortable and relaxed speaking in a new language. And maybe it's not in the classroom. Maybe you sit with them for 5 minutes on the playground and you practice some fun things in English with them. Or maybe you talk to them in the hallway and give them a high five and teach them a couple phrases. Confidence building is really important. So you as a teacher have to build students' confidence. That does take time. I have a lot of anxiety about speaking Spanish, and I'm just being honest with you. I had somebody in my house the other day who was a native Spanish speaker who didn't speak English, and my mind just went blank. I was like, where's all my language? Where did it go? And I remember what it's like to learn German. The same thing happened. Now I'm at a level in German where I don't have that anxiety, but I still have that anxiety with Spanish. And I think as a teacher, you have to have these situations where you're challenging them, but not in a way that makes them even more frustrated and nervous. I hope that answers your question well enough.
No, that's right, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, no more questions. Todd, I really appreciate for everything. Oh, another one.
Hold on, here we go.
Maria Camila. Okay, Maria
Camila. You're asking too many questions.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding.
This is the last one.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Hold on, we got two more.
Oh,
so
okay.
Larry, you're fine. You're fine if you want to go.
Okay, what tools do you implement with those children who have cognitive disabilities or learning problems, when many times their behavior is a bit difficult to handle, are not enough to provide to work with them, and the classes don't develop as planned? Oh,
yeah, that's a challenge when you don't have resources, and that's something we talked about is having the right resources. So what you have to do, and you know, it is on the teacher to be creative. One thing that I've seen is having some of your students in the classroom be a buddy for that student to help them and support them. Now you have to be careful with this because you don't want that to be the only thing that that student does, because you, again, like we said earlier, you want your students to be independent and autonomous, but they might need a buddy. What I mean by buddy, if that doesn't translate, just have a friend, have 3 or 4 other students in the classroom where you say, hey, you're gonna work with this student for 20 minutes every day on this particular task. So that gives you an opportunity to say, okay, I can take a break and focus on some other students. And that also builds community within your classroom. I mean, that's just one strategy. We could probably talk until 10:30 tonight about about some more ideas, Maria. But that's a tough one. When you've got students who have real disabilities in the classroom, that's a challenge for you as teachers. You know, in public education in the U.S., those students do receive special support throughout the day. Every situation I've been in teaching private and public schools, we've had that, and that's a real challenge when you don't. So I'm happy to have another conversation with you about, you know, what we can do to be creative in that environment. So feel free to send me an email or a message or something. We can talk more.
Okay, Todd. Well, I see no more comments.
There's one more
questions.
Dana Garcia.
Yes,
can also work
yes,
with
the students typed her name, his name, okay, the semester, everything. And in a conclusion, I say thank you for everything, for your, let me check, hold on.
There's one
for
other
everything, like you mentioned before, Todd, we could learn about innovation, I mean, different methodologies, well, everything. You can contract theories, authors, and because of that, thank you so far, okay?
Thank you so much. I just put my email address in there, and let me just, if anybody wants to email me or text, they're more than welcome to. So
okay, actually it's useful for us. Professor Edgar, Camila, please.
Okay.
Hold on.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias de nuevo al profesor Todd Beard. Muy bien, señoras y señores, así con esta conferencia damos por terminado este evento organizado por la Facultad de Ciencias de la Educación y el programa de licenciatura en lenguas extranjeras con énfasis en inglés de la UCEBA. Queremos agradecer a la señora decana y resaltar la labor del comité organizador compuesto por la coordinadora del programa, Magister Lice Ramos, y los profesores Claudia Patricia Rivera, Leonardo Prada, Olga Lisbeth Salamanca, Larry Peñaranda, Ever Caicedo y quien les habla. Además de un agradecimiento muy especial a nuestra maestra de ceremonias, Camila Botero Cardona, estudiante de 7º semestre de la licenciatura, por su compromiso y colaboración para que este evento fuera llevado a cabo con éxito. A ustedes por su presencia y, por supuesto, a los distinguidos conferencistas que nos honraron con su participación en el 2º Congreso Internacional de Lenguas Extranjeras en Investigación e Innovación Pedagógica. Buenas noches y felicidades para todos.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is how we close this event organized by the Faculty of Educational Sciences and the Bachelor's Degree Program in Foreign Languages of UCEBA. We want to thank the Dean and highlight the work of the organizing committee made up of the coordinator of the program, Magister Lisette Ramos, and professors Claudia Patricia Rivera, Leonardo Prada, Olga Lisbeth Salamanca, Larry Peñaranda, and Ebert Caicedo. In addition to a very special thanks to our Master of Ceremonies, Magister Edgar Hernan Ramirez, full-time professor of the program. To all of you for your attendance, and of course to the distinguished speakers who honored us with their participation in the 2nd International Congress on Research and Pedagogical Innovation. Good evening and congratulations to all of you.